Hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis for over 37 years. And many of you know, if you've been watching my channel for a while, that I spend quite a lot of time out on the internet looking for articles and websites and YouTube channels to collect information, or to at least see what's going on out there in the world of MS, so I can bring back to you some of the things that I find that I think are pretty interesting and useful. And recently, I watched a video from one of the people that I follow on YouTube. His name is Dr. Brandon Beaber. He works out of Los Angeles. He's a neurologist. And he did a video entitled 10 Myths About Multiple Sclerosis. And I'm going to link the video down below. But one thing that he did do was ask us to comment on his video and provide him with other ideas or other perspectives. And so I thought that I might do that. I'm going to go ahead and provide him that comment in the form of this video, but I'll also, of course, put it here for you too, so you can see what this video made me think about. And I would, of course, invite you to submit your own comments to me and to Dr. Beaber about this topic, because there's lots to think about here. The way he presented it, it made me think that maybe it would be like he was my neurologist and I was his patient, and he went over some of this with me. This is what I might say back to him. I kind of wanted it to be almost more like a conversation. But of course, he can't answer my answers, at least not here. So we'll see how it goes.
10 myths about multiple sclerosis. Number 1, people with MS will eventually require a wheelchair. In reality, the prognosis of MS is highly variable, with a lot of people doing surprisingly well after many decades. For example, this study at the University of California, San Francisco, called the MS EPIC study, found that for people with relapsing onset MS, even after 20 years, only about 16% even required a cane to walk 100 meters. The remainder were walking independently without assistance. However, the prognosis of progressive MS tends to be somewhat worse. According to this other study, by age 60, about 25% did require a wheelchair, although many people with progressive MS do surprisingly well also. There's also a trend for the prognosis of MS in terms of disability to be getting better over time, possibly because we're better at diagnosing milder MS and due to the effect of disease-modifying therapies.
So this first myth that he talks about, the wheelchair, it's been a symbol of disability for a long time. And as a result, I think in our culture, it's become kind of stereotyped. And of course, being disabled is not considered a really great thing in our culture. If you doubt that, I only have to remind you that the common expression is confined to a wheelchair. Thankfully, nowadays, we're starting to refer to it as using a wheelchair, which I do appreciate. But wheelchairs still, they kind of loom in the public imagination as the worst thing that could happen. If you get MS, you end up in a wheelchair. I think most of us would rather not wind up using a wheelchair, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the end of the world. And I got to thinking about conversations I've had with friends who use a wheelchair for whatever reason. Some of them have MS, some of them have other reasons. But it really comes down to the perspective from which you're looking at the wheelchair. If you're looking at it from the perspective of somebody who can walk or can walk without much difficulty, or who has enough energy to remain standing for long periods of time, then to you, a wheelchair symbolizes loss. But on the other hand, if you're looking at it from the point of view of someone who cannot walk on their own, cannot get from point A to point B unassisted, needs people to be doing this, that, and the other thing for them, the wheelchair suddenly becomes not a symbol of loss, but a symbol of freedom. Wheelchairs, first of all, have come a long way since those big clunky things symbolized on the disability placard that we're all familiar with. They are a lot more compact. They have a better turning radius. They have much more going for them than they used to. And I have heard people say that using a wheelchair enables them to do things for themselves that in the past they hadn't been able to do, that they had to rely on someone else to do or couldn't do it at all. And in that regard, the wheelchair may not be anything more than a tool that helps us achieve what we want to achieve. In a sense, and I don't mean to trivialize this in any way, but in a sense, it's a tool like my glasses are a tool. I can't really see as well without my glasses, and I'm happy to have them, although when I first realized I had to have glasses, yes, it felt like a loss. It felt like, well, my eyes are getting old and now I'm going to need assistance. Same thing when I first started using a cane. It felt like a loss at first, but now there are things that I would just not even sign up to do if I didn't have that cane to keep me going in the right direction or keep me steady, help me stand for a long period of time. Yeah, so it's a tool. And that's really kind of what I wanted to say there. I think Dr. Beaber does a great job of explaining the statistics on how many people diagnosed with MS will end up using a wheelchair. But I just wanted to flesh it out more from the psychological side of it. It's just something that we have to think about maybe a little bit differently. The second myth that he talks about has to do with stem cell research. And I have to say, I have not made a video specifically about stem cell research. If you've been following my channel, you know that there are certain treatment options that I have made at least one video on, because I really do think that there's some promise there, or that we might learn something. But the stem cell one, I just really haven't been able to make up my mind whether that's something I would even tacitly recommend by doing a video on it. I think there's promise there, but I would agree with Dr. Beaber that it's not really proven yet. And as he describes what is really going on here, that you're using chemotherapy to basically kill off your immune system, that kind of scares me, because then you're vulnerable to any kind of infection. It's not like it's going to be a 2-day procedure where one day they kill your immune system and the next day you get a new one. This is a process, and during that time, you've got to be really, really careful not to get any kind of infection or pick up anything that's contagious. So it's kind of a risk. In fact, not kind of a risk, it's a big risk. And I do not tend to recommend things here or even speak positively about things that entail a big risk. One of my personality traits entails a certain amount of risk aversion. When I have something, even if it's not optimal, I'm very reluctant to give up ground and have less, just on the off chance that I might end up with something better. I think that stem cells might actually prove useful at some point, but I don't think the time is now. I'm certainly not going to go out of my way to undergo stem cell treatment. But thank you, Dr. Beaber, for that really, really helpful explanation. Dr. Beaber's next two myths that he discusses, I'm going to talk about the same observation that I had for both of them. The first one is that there's a myth that MS is largely genetic, and statistics seem to prove otherwise. And then the myth number 4 is that MS is a predominantly Caucasian disease. That's what used to be thought, and now we're finding that is absolutely not the case. Not terribly surprising to find all this, but I think one of the things that's given us both the debunking of the myth and perhaps obscures some more truth that we don't even know, is that we are getting our information from statistics that are being collected by the medical community and rolled up and aggregated, and that's how come we know all these things. And I think that's wonderful, but I also think there's a lot that's just not getting factored into those statistics. And so I guess that would be a question I might have back to Dr. Beaber is, how do we know the reason, for example, when you look at the world map that he put up, the countries that show as having lots of MS also just so happen to be countries that have very robust medical systems and internet connectivity, data collection, aggregation services, etc., etc. Now, that isn't 100%, but it's awfully close. So it kind of makes me wonder, is there a lot more MS that's going unreported because it's in parts of the world where it's either not being correctly diagnosed, it's not being reported into the system? The other thing, too, is that if there's a large segment of the population that does not have access to medical care or to prescription pharmaceuticals, then there isn't really going to be an accurate reporting, right? So I'm just curious about that, and I'd just love to know what Dr. Beaber would have to say about that. Well, I'm going to skip down to the eighth myth that he talks about, the heat sensitivity myth, and he does acknowledge that people with multiple sclerosis are sensitive to heat, but he assures us that it's not actually making our disease worse. And I would agree with that. But here's my question, and this is not just for him alone, but maybe for anybody. Why is it that whenever we talk about heat and multiple sclerosis, we just talk about heat and we don't talk about humidity? I just want to share my own experience. In my adult life with multiple sclerosis, I basically lived in two places. I've lived in upstate New York and I've lived in eastern Washington state. And those two climates are very different in terms of humidity, which is the big factor, right? In upstate New York, very, very humid summers. And in eastern Washington, very dry summers. The humidity rarely even gets anywhere near 50% out here. And for me, I have found that it is a totally different experience living in one place versus the other. When I first was diagnosed with MS, I lived here in eastern Washington with the dry heat. And while I didn't necessarily feel like I was at my most energetic in those weather conditions, I wasn't debilitated. But for a few years, some time ago, we moved back to upstate New York for about 9 years. And it got to where I turned on the air conditioner as soon as it got muggy, and it was on all summer long, and I pretty much sat next to it and didn't do much of anything. And that's a slight exaggeration, but not much, because nothing saps my energy faster than humid heat. And I'd just be curious to know if other people have that same differentiation. And then the last myth that he talks about is the effectiveness of using steroids to treat optic neuritis. Now, this one, I guess, is going to be really anecdotal, and I don't even have access to the records anymore because the doctors that treated me in the past are either retired or deceased, and who knows where the records ended up. But when I had optic neuritis the first several times, I was put on a course of steroids, prednisone, and okay, it took a little while, but it cleared up in a matter of weeks, I would say. But then I got an attack of optic neuritis during a time when the medical community had decided, for whatever reason, that steroids were contraindicated, meaning don't prescribe them, for optic neuritis. And so I was not able to get access to anything to help me. I just toughed it out, waited for it to get better. Well, months went by, honestly. I mean, I waited a long time, and it never really got all that much better. So I went to an eye doctor finally because I just thought, well, maybe there's something that he can do for me. And he looked at the pallor in my optic nerves, and he said that one where I was having the attack of optic neuritis was much more severe than in the other eyes. I did see some improvement over a long period of time, but it didn't come back the way the others did. And I have to say that in my view, you're never going to convince me that steroids wouldn't have helped me. So too late to do anything much about that. But that's just a data point for what it's worth. But I want to thank Dr. Beaber for the videos that he puts out. I really encourage all of you to go and look him up. He's got so many videos on so many subjects. He's got a fun sense of humor. I'm thankful for people like him, and I'm glad that he makes these videos so that those of us who don't live anywhere near Los Angeles can take advantage of his wisdom. Well, that's all I have for you today. Enjoy the summer as best as you can. Take really good care of yourself, and I'll see you again in my next video.